Welcome and good evening, everyone. Hello and welcome to our first lecture on a 5-part lecture series about Israel. My name is Talita Höhl, and I will give you these lectures in the upcoming weeks. Tonight, we'll start with the first part called The History of Israel from Abraham to Jesus. And all of this is part of the lecture series called A Fresh Perspective on Israel. This series takes place here in Fulda in Germany, and it's also possible to join online via the Google Meet. And we also record this meeting so that you can watch it later on YouTube. So hello and welcome to everyone who's watching this now on YouTube in a later recording. So welcome everyone. I apologize for my voice. Usually my voice is not like this, but I was sick the past week and I had a sore throat and lots of coughing. So now my voice is really weird, but I hope that you understand me and that I'll be possible to continue for the next hour and a half. And I will give you some information about how we will structure this meeting tonight. So first of all, I'll start with a small introduction, a small prayer, and then we'll listen to a worship song. You're welcome to join if you want to. After that, I'll give you the lecture, which takes about 1 hour, 1 hour. And after that, we have half an hour where you can ask questions, and I'll give my best to answer. You can ask these questions when you're here in this room. So I'll give you the microphone. You can ask questions through the chat when you're in the online meeting. And if you want to ask your question aloud, then you can also raise your finger and we will give you the ability, like you'll be able to speak if you want to. Like you can write down your question in the chat. I'll read it out and then answer. Or you can ask your question yourself. That means that you'll also be seen or at least heard in the YouTube recording. So just for you to know, we'll have 1 hour of lecture and after that half an hour of questions. So I'll give you some more information now about this lecture series. It's, as I said, a 5-part series. That means I will give you an overview over Israel, the topic of Israel, in 5 parts. That doesn't mean that it includes everything, but it includes at least, in my view, everything you need to know or you have to have heard about Israel so that you have an overview about history and culture, society, and the most important things you need to know about Israel. Not only religion, not only land history, but a bit of everything. So the first part deals with the history of Israel from actually the beginning, I wouldn't say creation of the world, but like we start with one person called Abraham, and from him we will give the whole lecture from Abraham to actually to the destruction of the Second Temple. I wanted to call it from Abraham to the Second Temple period, but I decided for calling it from Abraham to Jesus because this is easier to remember, but it doesn't mean that we will stop with Jesus or that we will spend too much time with that. It's only to give you an idea of which time frame we will talk about. The second part will be about the development of Judaism and Christianity, the way how we know it, and how history shaped both of these religions or cultures, or however you want to call it. The third part will be about the Holocaust, the Shoah, and also the topic, how do we remember? So it's not only a history lesson, but it's more of how do we remember and why, and what should we take care of when we do that. The fourth part will deal with the history of the state of Israel. So we will talk about, actually, we will start with the beginning of Zionism. This is where we will end in part 2. And we will talk about the history of the state of Israel until recent events, but we will dedicate a full lecture on the recent events, which all have to do with October 7th, with the massacre that took place on October 7th, and how Israel and the Middle East has changed through that, and how it looked like before and after, and all of this tragedy. So we will talk about these 5 parts in these 5 lectures on Israel. And everything I'm going to say is something that should help you to get an idea of the big picture of Israel. It should help you to have a frame for all ideas and all knowledge that you'll learn about and that you'll hear in the news and media, in your Bible, and wherever you talk about it. And this should help you get a big frame so that you can put in things better and understand the big developments and how things belong together and why we actually talk about them. Okay, so now I want to start with a prayer. We are a Christian church where we meet here, so this is why I will start with a Christian prayer. And every one of you who wants to join is welcome. I know that we have some Jewish listeners and some Christian listeners and also some atheist listeners and those who don't even consider themselves part of a religion or anything. So I just invite you to listen and to be part of it. That, of course, you don't have to. So first I'll pray and then I'll invite you to join our worship song. God, we come before you and we thank you so much that you have created heaven and earth. We thank you for your kindness, for your goodness, for your faithfulness. We thank you for Israel, for a nation that you've blessed and that you've chosen. And we thank you that we're able to learn tonight more about Israel. I ask you for your guidance, for your provision. I ask for wisdom, for open hearts, that your love might speak through the words that I'll say. And I ask you, God, for good words, for strength and health, and that your truth and your wisdom will be shared tonight. I also thank you for everyone who's listening, that you would fill us with knowledge and wisdom that we might understand. Thank you, Holy Spirit, that you're with us and that you will guide us tonight. In Jesus' name, amen.
Adonai,
Wow, what a powerful worship song. Thank you for everyone who joined us in worship. That was a worship song, as you might have seen, that was in Hebrew. And the words were also translated into English so that you could follow and read along and see that it was quite a powerful worship song that talked about many topics that we will also be talking about tonight. It talked about the tabernacle that God decided that He wanted to live with mankind, that He wanted to live with His people, and that He wanted to live even amongst them. And it was about the faithfulness and the goodness of God, about how great He is. So, a really, really good worship song, and I really enjoyed it. I hope you also did. So, now let's go right into the topic. We'll start with part one, the history of Israel from Abraham to Jesus. That's the topic of the lecture tonight from the series A Fresh Perspective on Israel. So, I'll start with a small question. The question is, what date is today? Of course, it's not that I'm asking because I didn't know. It's because I wanted to show you something. Many people say today is Tuesday, February 24th, 2026. That's the date. And some people might even add, well, it's BC. Sorry, it's AD. It's 2026 AD, Anno Domini. That means after, like in the year of the Lord, which is after Jesus. And other people might say, well, I'm not that religious. I don't want to say Jesus. So I'll say CE, which means Common Era. And if any event that took place before 2026 years, you would say the date of the event, and then you would say it was BC, which means before Christ. Or if you want to say, well, I'm not Christian, or I don't want to put Christ in that, or like I don't want to mention Jesus in a date, then you might say BCE, which means before Common or Current Era. So that's the way how we decided to frame a date in the West. And it spread all over the world, basically, so that nowadays this is a way of saying which date it is, and everyone should understand. If you say February, people know you're talking about a month, and they also know which month. And usually, all around the world, it's the same, so people understand. But there are many other ways of how to say which date it is, and I gave you here on this presentation another example, which is how the Jewish calendar frames today. So they would say today is Yom Shishi, which means it's the third day of the week. The week always starts with like the day that we call Sunday, and it goes all the way to Shabbat, which is the last day. Every day has only, like, we call it the first, the second, the third, the fourth, and so on, until the sixth day, and then we say the seventh day has a name, and it's called Shabbat. So Jewish people all around the world would say, today is Yom Shishi, the 7th of Adar, in the year 5786. So first of all, you might see it's another date of another month. Okay, Adar, they don't use the like January, February calendar that we have, but another one. Okay, you might understand this, but then this last number, which gives us the year, might be quite confusing, because such a high number of years, what do you count from? Like with the first date, you see it's 2026. That's 2026 years after Jesus. Well, you could say Jesus' birth, which is not quite correct. He was actually born before his birth, whatever. Like around 2026 years ago, a major event took place, and from that, everything that happens nowadays is called before or after that date. But with the Jewish calendar, we have something very special. It counts actually since the creation of the world. The Bible gives us dates about how old people became and how old they were when their son was born, and how old that son was when the grandson was born, and so on, so that people counted back And they could say, okay, our world, this Earth, is 5,786 years old. And this is the way of how a Jewish calendar says which date it is. Why did I have this question in the beginning? Because I will give you an overview of what happened from Abraham to the time of the Second Temple, and all the dates that I'm going to use are dates that refer to BC or BCE, depends on how you want to frame it, or then later events, I frame them as AD or CE, but they all actually have another equivalent, another way of how to say when they happened. And then you might understand that there is a pattern in what happened throughout history. And it depends on which calendar you use. Like, for example, you could have asked some Egyptian pharaohs what date it is, and they would say, well, it's the second year of the reign of the pharaoh, this and this. Or you ask someone else, and he would say, it's the third year of the time of the ruler, this and that, who reigned. So people usually call things after, like they put the date and the years of since when they count from the first king of their empire, for example, or the foundation of their city or something like this. For example, the Romans in 753 BC, they say, the legend says, that Romulus and Remus founded Rome, and from that time on, the Romans would count like major events of their time. So I would say it makes a lot of sense to count from the creation of the world. So this is quite inclusive. It has everything included. You can't go beyond, like you can't go behind that date. Only God can, because He is before. But we aren't. So I just want to make you aware of the fact that things are not always seen the way how we see it now through our modern Western eyes. Okay, the next thing we're going to do is I'll give you an historical overview over, let's say, all these 5,786 years. And I did it that way. I discovered a pattern that every 500 years, a major event took place. I'm not saying that only every 500 years something big happens, but what I want to say is so that you can get a better understanding of what happened throughout history, I want you to remember one thing for every 500 years so that you know when things happened. Like when you hear something, let's say in the news or you read a book, and it says it wasn't the time of this and that person, and you have no clue when that was. For example, Abraham, we will talk about Abraham today. Abraham, Moses, David, when did they live? Well, it was obviously before Jesus, but when exactly? People usually have no idea. And then other people say, well, we don't know exactly. And then historians say this, and archaeologists say that, and scientists say this, and theologians say that. It's not about what people say. It's about, let's read the Bible the way how it is and put pieces together, and then you get a time frame. And I want to give you an understanding now of history so that you can have, for every 500 years, you can remember one person. So this is a spoiler alert. Whatever you're gonna see now is not it's not how do I say this? I don't want to give these dates to an historian because they're not exactly accurate, of course, but they give you a better understanding of what happened. So this is the historical overview. As you can see, every 500 years something took place. Or a person was born, or something happened during their time, during their life. And as I said, these times are like, these dates are not exact. It's only roughly, it's like estimated, so that you can have a better understanding. So let's start with the creation of the world, which was 5,786 years ago. God created Adam. Adam was the first man, and then God created Eve, his wife, and they had kids, and they had kids, and they had kids. And 500 years later, there was a man called Enoch. He's quite famous because God let him ascend to heaven without dying. It was quite cool. And then time went on, people had children until Noah. And Noah, or Noah as you say in English, Noah is also quite a famous person because he was the one who, when he was 600 years old, the flood came. So during his life, the great flood came and covered all the earth with water, and everyone had to die, all the animals, all the people, except for Noah and his wife and his 3 children and their wives. So 8 people survived, and from each animal, 2 of a kind, so male and female. And that happened another 500 years later. So here I want to put a cut because after that we will talk about Abraham. So we talk about the first, let's say, 2,000 years of, or 2,500 years of history, mankind history, is the history of what happened with the first people on earth. And there's no other book, no other equivalent source in the world that can compare with the Bible that has such a profound and precise description of what happened in the first years of mankind. And it's actually quite accurate. It says very specifically how God created mankind and what he did, that he even talked with people, that he walked with people in the garden. He enjoyed being around the people that he has created. And the Bible tells us that Adam and Eve lived in the Garden of Eden and they lived with God and it was all perfect, but they ate from a fruit that was forbidden to eat from. And this was the first sin, and this is how they were expelled from the Garden of Eden. And you might think, wow, that's not a nice story. Look, God expelled them. God forbid them to come back to the Garden of Eden. But actually, that was a good thing that God forbid them to come back, because if they returned or if they stayed in the Garden of Eden, they could have eaten from the tree of life. There were 2 different trees. The one tree that they were forbidden to eat of, and the other one, the tree of life. And if they ate from that tree, they would live forever. You might think, wow, that's so cool. Living forever, isn't that precious? Isn't that super? But the problem is, if they lived in sin forever, they would be separated from God forever. This is why God forbid them to come back to the Garden of Eden, so that they could die physically and the history of mankind could continue until he would send a savior from that sin, so that people could be in the presence of God again. Because if you're sinful, you can't be in the presence of God because he's so holy. That was possible back then in Garden Eden when Adam and Eve had no sin. They were together with God, but the moment they sinned, they couldn't anymore. So it's actually good that God forbid them to come back to the Garden of Eden, because that was the preparation of a way that he would make in order to save people, like mankind, forever. So the first 2,500 years talk about how people just tried to live life, but they failed, and God had to destroy mankind through the flood. And then he started again. He restarted with Noah and his family, and they spread throughout the world. That was his plan. But at some point, people didn't want to do that. They wanted to stay in one city. They wanted to build a tower that would reach heaven, that would reach the sky. And then God gave them different languages. That was the Tower of Babel. And God gave them different languages so that they would spread all over the world. This is what happened. And from that time on, the Bible is not doesn't focus on mankind in general, but focuses on one family only. So it is as if the Bible explains us the whole frame, like the whole context, and all of a sudden it zooms in into the life of one man called Abraham. And God calls Abraham and his descendants to be his personal people, not Abraham yet, only from his grandson on. But with Abraham, the story begins. So that's why we will talk about Abraham, because he is the forefather of Israel. He is like Abraham is a very important figure when we talk about Israel. So we will start with Abraham, and then we will go all the way to Jesus, the time of Second Temple. So basically, we will talk about the rest of the Bible. So the first 11 chapters of the Bible talk about the first 2,500 years. And then from chapter 12 of the first book of the Bible on, the rest of the whole book, the rest of the entire Bible, including not only the Tanakh, the Old Testament, or the Apocryphs, which are in the Catholic Bible, but also the so-called New Testament that the Christians read. So it like the story continues, and the lecture that we'll be giving tonight is about everything, except for the prophecies that are still to be fulfilled. But everything that happened in history, we will talk about everything that is written in these books. Okay, so we have Abraham. He lived around 2000 BC. And 500 years later, a very, very important figure came up. His name is Moses. We will learn more about him tonight. Another 500 years later, there was David, 1000 BC, the second king of Israel, very important king, very important figure. Moses was the one with the Ten Commandments, if you didn't know, and David was then the one when the people of Israel have already lived, they have already settled in the land of Israel, they live there, they have a king. And 500 years later, after David, I wrote down there, so returning from the Babylonian exile. If you return, that means that you've been in the exile before. Yes, that's right. So the people of Israel did not always live in their country. There were also other rulers, and some of them forced them to leave the country. They were in exile, and then they could return finally. And then 500 years later, that was the time of the turn of the eras. This is when Jesus lived, and this is until we will talk about tonight. So from Abraham to Jesus. But I'll give you just a little overview, and this is the time that you might know better. It's around 500 years later. Actually, it's not really accurate to say this, but so that you get an idea. There was Muhammad. He lived actually later than 500 years AD, but whatever. Just to give you an understanding. And then another 500 years later, the Crusaders took place. And another 500 years later, at least in our Western world, that is an important figure, Martin Luther. I'm not talking about Martin Luther King. He was called after Martin Luther, who did a big reformation in church and in church history in general and in theology worldwide. So he was quite an important figure. And then 500 years later is the time of us living now. And as you can see, I wrote down the State of Israel, not saying that this is the era of the State of Israel, but in 1948, the State of Israel was founded. So I think this is quite an important, it marks quite an important time in the history of Israel, as we want to talk about in these lectures. Okay, so that was my overview so that you can see, and it's, as I said, it's a frame so that you can remember better when happened what. And now we will go deeper into it and see. Okay, as I said, when the Bible zooms in and talks about Abraham, so it talked about people in general beforehand. It also talked about Noah specifically, but it spoke about the people of the world. And now, from Genesis chapter 12 on, it zooms in and it starts with the story of Abraham. And I'm going to read the first 3 verses of this chapter and then verse 7, because there God is making a covenant with Abraham. The Lord has said to Abram, "Go from your country, your people, and your father's household to the land I will show you. I will make you into a great nation, and I will bless you. I will make your name great, and you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and whoever curses you, I will curse. And all peoples on earth will be blessed through you." The Lord appeared to Abram and said, "To your offspring I will give this land." So he built an altar there to the Lord who had appeared to him. That's God's covenant with Abraham. So the story of Abraham doesn't start with, "This is Abraham, a very great guy. He was so wonderful that God decided to choose him." No, it just basically says God calls Abraham. Back then he was still called Abram. That was the name his parents gave him. Later, God changed his name to Abraham. So in the beginning, God came to Abram and basically called him out of his country, out of his people, out of his father's household. And he says, "If you trust me, I will show you a great land and you will live there with your people." So basically, it's not a question, do you want to go? It's a commandment. God says, "Go out of everything that you know, and I will show you something that you don't know yet. You don't know where it is, but I will give your descendants the land that I will show you, and they will live there," which is a great promise and which is a great covenant that God makes with Abram here. Because actually, if you make a covenant, that means two parties do something. They agree on something, and both of them have part in this covenant. But here, God is making a covenant with himself, kind of, because it's a promise to Abraham. It's nothing that Abraham has to do. It's not only if you do this and this, you will get all these blessings. It's like a commandment that God, like, let's put it this way. He shows him future. He says, "This is how it will be." And God makes a promise only from his side. Abraham doesn't have to do anything. And God makes quite big promises here. Not only that he promises Abraham to have children and big, like lots of people coming after him, he not only promises a nation to be born out of him, out of his seed, he also promised them to inherit a land that Abraham doesn't know. But back then he has never seen that land. He doesn't know what God is actually talking about. But there is a land and there is a people, so the descendants of Abraham, they deserve that land. They have a right on living in that land. And who gives them this right for living there? It's God himself. And God says this to Abraham without asking anything from Abraham to do. So I'll repeat. God says to Abraham in verse 7, "To your offspring I will give this land." So it's a promise. God himself gives this land to the descendants of Abraham. And in verse 2 he says, "I'll make you into a great nation." Wow, and I will bless you. Incredible. And then he also says that he will make the name of Abraham great and that Abraham will be a blessing. And then he says, and this is quite interesting, everyone who blesses the descendants of Abraham will also be blessed, and everyone who curses them will also be cursed from God himself. So God says, "I'll bless those who bless you, and whoever curses you, I will curse." And then he says, "And all peoples on earth will be blessed through you." And as you might see, this is, God talks about Israel here, the people of Israel. The descendants of Abraham, who God talks about, like God talks about the descendants of Abraham, but not all of them. He talks about the nation that comes out of it, and this is Israel. And he talks about the big blessing that Israel will be, that they will live in the land that God will give them, and they will be a big blessing to all of the earth. So to all peoples of the earth, which is quite interesting. He says, all peoples on earth will be blessed through you. So God already has the plan to bless everyone on this earth through his people, Israel. Israel is not mentioned here as Israel, but we see it's the descendants of Abraham. Okay, let's keep this covenant in mind. We will talk about 3 covenants tonight. So this is the first, God's covenant with Abraham, and we see it's something that is only a promise from God to Abraham. Abraham doesn't have to do anything. So now let's see how the story of Abraham develops. I will talk about the first 500 years now, from Abraham to Moses. As I promised you, you only have to keep in mind one name for each 500 years. So within the next 500 years, from Abraham to Moses, everything you have to know is on this slide. So Abraham has a son. He actually has 2 sons. And actually he has more. But the one son that is the promised son, the most important one, is Isaac. And all of the blessings that God has for Abraham will go onto Isaac. And the Bible repeats this, and God repeats his covenant with Isaac. And then Isaac has a son named Jacob. He actually has 2 sons. They're even twins. So this time it's even closer. They're not from different mothers. They're from the same mother. They were even at the same time in the womb of the same mother. And God chooses only one, Jacob. And the blessings that God talked about with Abraham now go on to Jacob. And Jacob gets a new name in the Bible called Israel. This is where the name of Israel comes from. Because Jacob wrestled with God, and Israel means like the one who wrestles with God, fights with God. So Jacob gets a new name, and his name is Israel now. So when we talk about the people of Israel, we talk about the people of Jacob, which means all of the children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, all the descendants of Jacob are the people of Israel. So Jacob, who is also called Israel, he is now, let's say, the forefather of the people of Israel. I know it all starts with Abraham, but not all of the children of Abraham get this certain covenant blessing. Not even all of Isaac's kids. Only Jacob and all of his kids and all of his descendants. So Jacob has 12 sons. One of them is called Joseph. Joseph has not only 11 brothers and 1 sister, they are also called the 12 tribes of Israel. But you know, the story is always a little more complicated. You cannot just say, okay, Joseph and his 11 brothers are the 12 tribes of Israel. Somehow that's right, but somehow it's not. Because when it comes later, when it comes to the point that they divide the land and every one of these tribes gets a part, Joseph himself doesn't get a part, but his 2 children, Ephraim and Manasseh, get a part. And another one, Levi, who is another son of Jacob, another brother of Joseph, he doesn't get a part because he should live amongst his brothers all throughout the land because they become the priestly tribe. So just so that you have heard about it, Joseph and his brothers, the 12 tribes of Israel, this is where they come from. So Jacob has 12 sons, and they live in Israel. When Abraham got the calling from God to leave his household, the place of where he lived before, that was in Iraq, in Ur, in Chaldea back then, and nowadays it's Iraq. He left. He came to the land that is now Israel. Back then it wasn't called Israel, of course, because Israel was not, like the name back then was not known yet. But Abraham lived in the land of Israel, the land Canaan. And his son Isaac lived there, his son Jacob lived there. All of his sons, Joseph and his brothers, lived there. And then Joseph was sold to the Egyptians by his brothers, by the way. And through a whole story, because there was a famine in Egypt and also in the land of Canaan, they all came to Egypt, and through Joseph, Egypt and the entire region was saved from that famine. And Joseph and his brothers and his entire family, all of them, moved to Egypt, and they lived there. In the beginning, that was quite a good life, but they stayed there for quite a long time. And it was hundreds of years later that the Pharaoh, who was then ruling, hundreds of years later, didn't know about the good things Joseph has done for his people. So he put the Israelites, were called Israelites because they were the descendants of Israel, he put them into slavery. So the Israelites had to serve as slaves in Egypt for quite a long time. It was, some people say 250 years, some people say 450 years. So it was for quite a long time they had to serve as slaves in Egypt. And then another figure comes up. His name is Moses, and he is known for rescuing his people from Egypt. First of all, the Pharaoh back then was really not nice. He wanted to reduce the amount of Israelites so that they would not be too many and might take over his power. So he killed all the male babies of the Israelites. But Moses was rescued, and he grew up in the house of the Pharaoh. And the first 40 years of his life, he lived in Egypt, got a really good education, had a really good life. And then he felt for his people, and he saw that they were in slavery, and he wanted justice, and he killed an Egyptian because that Egyptian killed an Israelite. So Moses had to flee from Egypt, and he lived in the desert for another 40 years until God called him in the burning bush. And similar to the story of Abraham, he simply said, Moses, but this time he could say, I'm the God of your forefathers. And he says, go back to Egypt and tell Pharaoh that he should let my people go. And Moses is like, oh, you can send someone else. I'm not the best person for that job. But God says, I've called you because I want you to go there. And so he goes back, and through mighty and powerful signs, God rescues his people out of Egypt. There were the 10 plagues through which the Pharaoh had to learn and to see that God is almighty. And everyone, the Pharaoh, the Egyptians, the Israelites, and all the other peoples around this area saw in these times back then that the God of Israel is the living and mighty God. And God rescued his people out of Egypt, and that was called the Exodus. And during that time of the Exodus, during that night, look, the Bible is a very precise book. Not only says, well, somehow God delivered his people. No, the Bible is very precise. It even tells us very exactly what happened on the night before they left Egypt, what they ate, what they did. They had to slay a lamb and put the blood of that lamb on the doorpost so that the angel of death would not kill them, the firstborns, because that was the 10th plague. And this is where the name Passover comes from, because the angel of death passed over their houses, passed over them, and they would not be killed because they had the blood of the lamb on their doorposts. And only the Israelites had that. The Egyptians didn't have. So the Egyptians had to suffer under that plague, and the Israelites were saved. And the next day, the Pharaoh let them go. So God rescued his people out of Egypt and let them go out of slavery. And he led them through the wilderness, through the desert. He split the sea before them, and they could be rescued, which was a great miracle. So from Abraham to Moses, 500 years, lots of family stories, but we see from a small family where it all started, it developed into a big people that we have now, the people of Israel. And now we'll see what happened with them. As I told you before, We'll talk about 3 covenants tonight. The first one was with Abraham, and the second one is the covenant at Mount Sinai. Sorry, the covenant at Mount Sinai. So the first covenant God makes with Abraham. Abraham is one man only. The second covenant at Mount Sinai, he makes with the entire people, the entire people of Israel. And we will read this covenant now. And you see the Bible is very precise. It gives you exactly the date of when things happened. It's not just roughly a few years later. No, it gives you the exact date, the month and the date when things took place. So I'll read from Exodus 19, the first 8 verses. On the first day of the 3rd month after the Israelites left Egypt, on that very day, they came to the desert of Sinai. After they set out from Rephidim, they entered the desert of Sinai, and Israel camped there in the desert in front of the mountain. Then Moses went up to God, and the Lord called him from the mountain and said, "This is what you are to say to the descendants of Jacob, and what you are to tell the people of Israel. You yourselves have seen what I did to Egypt, and how I carried you on eagle's wings and brought you to myself. Now, if you obey me fully and keep my covenant, then out of all nations you will be my treasured possession. Although the whole earth is mine, you will be for me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation." These are the words you are to speak to the Israelites. So Moses went back and summoned the elders of the people and said before them all the words the Lord had commanded him to speak. The people all responded together, "We will do everything the Lord has said." So Moses brought their answer back to the Lord. So as you can see, the covenant at Mount Sinai is an actual covenant. It's 2 different parties, and both have to agree on something, both have to do something. And this is what we can see here in verse 5. God says, "If you obey me fully and keep my covenant." This is what the Israelites have to do. That's at Mount Sinai, God gave them the 10 Commandments. You might have heard of them. And lots of other laws. It's not only 10, it's a whole bunch of commandments and laws, but this is the law that God gave them. And he asked the people of Israel to follow these laws and to keep this commandment, to keep this covenant. And God, on the other hand, will do this. His part is that out of all nations, the people of Israel will be God's treasured possession. So they will be His. They will be a special people. They will be the chosen people. And God says very precisely, although the whole earth is mine, all of the world belongs to God. He has created the entire world. So all the peoples on this earth are His. But He wants the people of Israel to be, for Him, a kingdom of priests and holy nation. He wants to separate them from the rest of the peoples, from the rest of the world, and they should be holy for Him. They should be His priests. They should be special to Him. And as a real covenant, as it works with a real covenant, both parties have to agree. So God agrees in saying that, and the people of Israel actually asked if they want to if they want to follow the commandments, if they want to agree with that covenant, and they actually say, "Yes, we want." We see in verse 8, the people all responded together, "We will do everything the Lord has said." So this is the way of how Israel agreed on that covenant. So both parts here, God and the people of Israel, agreed that they want to have this covenant. So this is the second covenant that we learn about tonight, the covenant at Mount Sinai. So we've heard about the story from Abraham to Moses. Now we go through the next 500 years, which are from Moses to David. So as we have learned, Moses lived for 40 years in Egypt. Then he had to flee to the desert, lived there for 40 years, got called through the burning bush by God to rescue his people. He went back to Egypt, rescued his people. They were delivered and they lived for 40 years in the desert. This is how they learned to follow God, to trust God, and how they experienced God's faithfulness every day, because God let them experience His presence every day. God actually gave them food every day, literally falling from heaven, so that they could eat from this the manna, and God helped them, also gave them water, whatever they needed. But at the same time, we also learn about Israel, how they were not always faithful, and how they worshipped an idol, which was a golden calf, and other things, how they didn't trust God. But it shows us also how God stayed faithful through the entire time. There were some consequences because Israel didn't believe and trust God. So, for example, they had to wander 40 years through the desert, but the covenant was not broken only because they didn't follow everything. That doesn't mean that God at his side would say, okay, you broke our covenant, so I will break mine too. No, God stays faithful. Although Israel doesn't keep fully everything of his side, God still keeps every part of his side from the covenant. This is very important to notice. So the covenant stays. And the people of Israel, we will learn now how the people of Israel actually came to the land of Israel. So they were just delivered out of Egypt. They lived for 40 years in the desert, and then they entered the promised land. And there was the man who came after Moses. It's not the son of Moses, but it is the one who led the people after Moses died. His name is Joshua. He's a very important figure in that story because he's the one who brings the people of Israel into the promised land. And this has a very special name. It's called the Israelite Highland Settlement. It's basically, if you have never heard about this phrase, it basically says that Israel entered the promised land. The people of Israel entered the land of Israel, that was back then not called the land of Israel yet, was the land of Canaan. And they entered this land, they conquered every single part of where they could live in, and then they lived in there. That doesn't mean that they conquered every single city. They didn't kill everyone who lived there, but they took control over most parts of that country, so that after a while you could definitely say the Israelites inherited that land, they lived in there, and they were the rulers. But they didn't have a king yet, because first of all, it was not planned by God to have a king, because God wanted to be the king kind of the people of Israel. He led them through his wisdom, and he let judges rise who would help the people of Israel understand what God wanted them to do. The judges were also the ones who led the people of Israel in wars and battles against people around them whenever people tried to attack them, which happened quite a lot. Then God let judges rise who would lead the people of Israel in their fight, in their battles against their enemies. And that was the time of the judges. And only when the people of Israel really said, now we want to have a king, we want to be like the other peoples in the world. They want to be like the other peoples in the world. They wanted to have a king, a man in front of them who would be their king. Although God himself was their king. They had actually the best position you could ever imagine, but still they wanted to be like the other peoples in the world, and they wanted to have a king. only then God allowed the prophet Samuel to anoint Saul to become the first king of Israel. So Samuel anointed Saul as king. And you might have the question in your mind, I've heard so much about God living amongst his people. Yes, back then in the wilderness, in the desert, God lived in a tent within his people. So the people of Israel walked from one place to the next, and they settled, and they camped in the desert, and a tent was in the middle of their camp, and that was the place where God dwelled in. And when they moved into the land of Israel, the promised land, the land of Canaan, they took this tent with them, and this tent was established in Shiloh. It's called the tabernacle, Mishkan in Hebrew. The tabernacle was placed in Shiloh, and this is close to Bethel. You've heard of that, because Shiloh might not be so well known, this place. It's north of Bethel, which is north of Jerusalem. So they had the tabernacle there, and only when they had a king, Saul was the first king. Only when they had the second king, actually, only when the third king of Israel was there, they built a temple for God to live in. But let's do it step by step. Okay, Saul is the first king of Israel. The people of Israel want to have a king. Samuel anoints Saul as king. Saul was not such a good king because, well, in the beginning he was, but then he didn't obey God. And another one was anointed as king. It was David. He was not the son of Saul. Saul was a very good-looking, handsome, very good man, but he did not do what God wanted him to do. So God chose David, the youngest of a family, a shepherd, to become king. As you see, he was not of a royal family, but he became the forefather of the royal family of the kings of Israel. Because from David on, his sons, his descendants, would be the next kings. So David was the second king of Israel, but probably the most famous king. He had a son, Solomon, who was also quite a famous king because he was very wise. And he actually built the temple then. But let's focus on this. Okay, from Moses to David, we have 500 years. The people of Israel, who are a people, but they have just been rescued out of slavery. They lived in the desert, and now 500 years from Moses to David to bring the people of Israel from desert wandering people into the land of Israel, where they could live in cities and in the end even have a king. So this is a story of how the people of Israel got into the land of Israel. And I brought you a map so that you can see a little bit of how this looks like. And I know with maps, the problem is, what do you show on a map? Because there's so much, but I want you to focus on main things. And of course, there's many, many maps that you can find that show how the 12 tribes of Israel settled in the land. There's many things that you can discover on a map. I just want to show you a map so that you can see actually where these places are that I just mentioned. Okay. The biggest part you can see is Manasseh, which is the part of where the tribe of Manasseh lived. If you follow this river Jordan, which is the blue line, and you go down, so in the north you have a little pot, which is like a water source, which is the Sea of Galilee. And then the Jordan River goes down, and then you have the Dead Sea, which is the other part. So on the left side, on the west side, of the Jordan River, right where the people of Manasseh stopped settling, down there you see Ephraim, and down there below it you see Benjamin. And in the region of where Benjamin settled, Benjamin and Judah, this is actually the place of this is quite an important place because in the area of Benjamin, you find Jerusalem. So once you found Jerusalem, you have I would say, the most important city on this map. You found it. Okay, so this is where Jerusalem is. I will point out 5 major cities on this map that are very important for the history of Israel, especially when it comes to the patriarchs, which is Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and the first the people of Israel, which is the most important cities there. So you have Jerusalem, which is one city already. Then you go a little further south. I'm not talking about Bethlehem, but another city that is even more south is called Hebron. Hebron is, follow on that map, it's further south, Jerusalem and then Hebron. Hebron back then was called Kiryat Arba. Kiryat Arba is the place where Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob and their wives, Sarah, Rebecca, and Leah are buried. And it's also the place, Mamre, next to Hebron, where Abraham settled, where he camped when he put his tent. So that's mentioned in the Bible. That's why this place is quite important. And then you go a little further down. So down of south of Hebron, you'll find Beersheba, which is in the area of Simeon. So Beersheba, or Beersheba, as you might say in English, Beersheba is also a very important place. It's the place where Abraham made a covenant, and not with God, another covenant, and Isaac lived there. So we know that the patriarchs lived in these places. So Beersheba in the south, then you go a little further Hebron, then you go a little further Jerusalem, and let's go even further north, and you'll find Shiloh, which is the place where the tabernacle stood. Next to it is Bethel. So from Jerusalem you might find first Bethel and then Shiloh. But Shiloh is the important place I want to talk about because the tabernacle stood there. But Bethel itself is also an important place because it's the place where Jacob had the dream of the letter that went all the way to the sky, but I actually have to say to heaven in this case. Okay, so that is the 4th place, and the 5th place I want to mention is if you go a little further north of Shiloh, you'll find Shechem, or Shechem in Hebrew, Shechem, which is the place of where Abraham lived for the first time, where he lived first when he settled in Canaan. So when Abraham came from Iraq and he moved to Israel and in the land of Canaan and he lived there, he lived first in Shechem, which is quite important. It's today Nablus. And next to Shechem, which is not on the map, is Samaria. So it's right next to Shechem. That's why it's probably not on the map. Is Samaria. Keep this name in mind, Samaria, because it will get important in just a few minutes. So these are the 5 major cities you have to keep in mind. Beersheba in the south, Hebron, Jerusalem, Shiloh, and then Shechem. And these 5 cities, as you can see, are all quite close to, they're closer to the Jordan River than to the Mediterranean Sea, which is important for when you think about today's map of Israel. So the people of Israel, the Jews that live in Israel now, they always have to fight for their own land. And the places that they have to fight for the most, the so-called West Bank, this is the place where their forefathers lived. They never lived in Tel Aviv. Tel Aviv was founded only in 1909. So Tel Aviv is a little more than 100 years old. While these cities, Beersheba and Hebron and Jerusalem and Shiloh and Shechem, they are thousands of years old, and the forefathers of Israel lived there. So these are the most important cities, and the places, the so-called West Bank, which is actually Judea and Samaria. This is the place where the Israelites settled, where the Israelites lived and where most of Israel's history took place. So these places are very important. I didn't talk about all the other places that are on this map. For example, Tirzah, which also later became the capital of the northern kingdom of Israel. But like, there's a lot of places that are important. But what I want to point out here is that most of these places that are the most important for the people of Israel, for the history of Israel, are in a place that the people of Israel nowadays, the Jews, have to fight for. Although this is Jewish homeland, this is actually the place that that the Jews should live in. Okay, let's continue. After showing you that map, I want to point out to the next major events that took place from David to the exile. So we've learned now the people of Israel have settled in the land of Israel. They now have a king. First one was Saul, the second one was David, and God actually renews his covenant over and over again and promises David, for example, that someone of his descendants will be on the throne of Israel. Always, someone of his descendants will be on the throne. So David, who is a great king, and God speaks to him and renews a covenant. So these people are really important. And then David has a son, and his name is Solomon. I mentioned him already because he was the one who would build the first temple. And David did something very important. David conquered Jerusalem. I didn't mention that before when I showed you the map, but this is why Jerusalem is so important. It became the capital of the land of Israel. Jerusalem back then was already the capital. David lived there. He had his palace there. Solomon, his son, built the first temple there. So Jerusalem was always the center of the land of Israel. And after Solomon, unfortunately, it was not that easy. It was not that the son of Solomon became next king. He had his son Rehoboam was to be the next king, but then Jeroboam was not quite happy with that, and they had a little fight, and the whole kingdom of Israel was split into two kingdoms. So we had the northern part, the so-called kingdom of Israel, and the southern part, the kingdom of Judah. So from that time on, we actually had only 3 kings who ruled over a united kingdom. And then we have a split kingdom, the kingdom of Israel and the kingdom of Judah. The kingdom of Israel in the north was actually all 10 tribes, except for Judah and Benjamin. And the kingdom of Judah was the tribe of Judah, and Benjamin. So only 2 tribes. So it was a lot smaller, but it lasted longer. So the capital of the kingdom of Israel, which was also called the kingdom of Samaria or the northern kingdom, the capital was Shechem, and then later Tirzah, but only for a short time, and then Samaria. This is why these places are so important for you to remember. As I told you, Shechem and Samaria, first Shechem and then Samaria became the capital of the kingdom of Israel, the northern kingdom. And the southern kingdom, the kingdom of Judah, had the capital Jerusalem. And both of these kingdoms survived for quite a while. They also had some fightings against each other, but mainly against other kingdoms that attacked them. And they didn't last forever, as you can see. And this is the first date I give you tonight, a date that you can remember because it's quite an important date. 721 BC is the year of the fall of the kingdom of Israel to the Assyrians. So the Assyrians came, they attacked, and they conquered the kingdom of Israel. That was in 721-22 BC, and the Assyrians ruled now over this area, and the people of the kingdom of Israel were spread, let's say, all over the Assyrian Empire, which was almost all over the world that was known back then. So the people of Israel from the northern part did not really exist afterwards. There are some who claim that they are still descendants and they always lived there. These are the so-called Samaritans, and that might be even true. I agree with them. And there are some more people who can say that, or who can prove that they are descendants from that. But most of the 10 tribes of Israel, of the kingdom of Israel, of the northern kingdom, are just lost, and we also call them the lost 10 tribes of Israel. So most of the people of Israel is not known nowadays, while the southern part, the kingdom of Judah, lasted a little longer until the Babylonians came, and the Babylonians conquered the southern part and deported the people of the kingdom of Judah to Babylon, to the place where the capital was of their empire, and this was called the exile. And this took place in another very important year, 586. 586 is the second date you should remember. That was the fall of the kingdom of Judah to the Babylonians. And as you remember, only the tribe of Judah and Benjamin lived in the southern part, the kingdom of Judah. Of course, some of the people of the kingdom of Israel fled when the Assyrians came. They fled to the southern part, and then the Babylonians came. They were deported to Babylon, and of course, always some poor farmers stayed and could live there, but most of them were deported to Babylon. So you might think now about where does this name, the Jews, come from? Because until now, I've only said the Israelites, and I mentioned the kingdom of Israel, the kingdom of Judah, and from now on, as the kingdom of Israel doesn't exist anymore, only the kingdom of Judah, and then it was also conquered, these people, the inhabitants of the kingdom of Judah, were no longer called the Israelites, because that was the northern part more. They were called the Jews because they were part of the kingdom of Judah. So actually, if you want to be very accurate, you had to say everyone who is a descendant of Judah is called Jew, or the other way around. All the Jews that we know nowadays, it looks like they're all descendants of Judah, but they're not. They might be from Judah or from Benjamin or from any of these lost 10 tribes, but only a minority of them is known. As I said, most of the 10 tribes are still lost. So this is where the name, the Jews, come from. It comes from the kingdom of Judah. And when the Babylonians came and deported them to Babylon, there was the great exile that was very traumatic, and the people of Israel were brought to exile. But 70 years later, the Persians came to power, and they conquered Babylon, and that was the end of exile, and the Israelites, so the Jews, could return to their homeland, to the land of Israel. And many of them did, but not all of them. And before we will go on to our last part, the last 500 years from exile to Jesus, I want to talk about the third covenant I promised you for tonight, which is a covenant that God makes with his people in these horrific times. So the kingdom of Israel has already fallen, and the kingdom of Judah is still there, but is shaking because the Babylonians are coming. And there's a prophet, and his name is Jeremiah, and he receives a prophecy from God that God will make a covenant with his people. So keep in mind, this is not a covenant that God is making at the moment with his people, but it's a promise for a covenant that God will make with his people. And this is called the New Covenant. This is actually how the Bible calls it, and this is how it is, because it's called the New Covenant. This is why it's used until today. The people talk about it as the New Covenant, and this is what the Christians believe is fulfilled through Jesus. So this is why they call their holy books the New Covenant, which is, covenant is testament, and this is why we say the New Testament, talking about this new covenant that is here mentioned through Jeremiah, that is promised by God to his people. So let's read this third covenant. The New Covenant, written in Jeremiah 31. The days are coming, declares the Lord, when I will make a new covenant with the people of Israel and with the people of Judah. It will not be like the covenant I made with their ancestors when I took them by the hand to lead them out of Egypt, because they broke my covenant, though I was a husband to them, declares the Lord. This is the covenant that I will make with the people of Israel after that time, declares the Lord. I will put my law in their minds and write it on their hearts. I will be their God, and they will be my people. No longer will they teach their neighbor or say to one another, "Know the Lord," because they will all know me, from the least of them to the greatest, declares the Lord. For I will forgive their wickedness and will remember their sins no more. So this new covenant explicitly says in the very first verse here, it's verse 31, God, the Lord, will make a new covenant with the people of Israel and with the people of Judah. Although many Christians claim, but we're also part of that covenant, and this is okay, this is true, this is what we believe. First and foremost, this is said that it's a covenant, a new covenant from God with the people of Israel and with the people of Judah. And note here, it's not just with the Jews or with the Israelites, it's with the people of Israel and the people of Judah. And it refers to the northern part of the kingdom of Samaria, the kingdom of Israel, the northern kingdom, and to the kingdom of Judah. So God mentions the people of Israel and the people of Judah, both of them alike, will be part of that new covenant. And then God makes some explanations, and he says it's not a covenant like the one from Mount Sinai, because that was a covenant that my people, the people of Israel, broke. Although I did everything good to them, I was like, God says he was a husband to them. So he took care of them, and his part, like from his side, he did everything. But the people of Israel broke this covenant. No, the new covenant will be in a new shape. It will be from different nature. And this is how the new covenant will look like. Verse 33, I will put my law in their minds and write it on their hearts. I will be their God, and they will be my people. So this is the new covenant, that the law will be written in their hearts. So there will be a law. There will be something that that the people have to do, but it will be something that will be so much part of their identity, of their DNA. It will be written on their heart so that it will come out of their heart when they do it. So it will be the perfection of the covenant of Mount Sinai. Not saying that covenant of Mount Sinai was bad, it was good, but it was not. It was never fulfilled because the people of Israel broke that covenant. But this new covenant will be the perfection because it will be written in their hearts. And verse 34 makes it more clear. It says, no one has to say to one another, "Know the Lord," but everyone will know God, from the least to the greatest. So it's a covenant that includes everyone. And this is the promise of the new covenant that God gives to Jeremiah, through Jeremiah to his people in these times of the fall of the northern kingdom, the southern kingdom is about to fall. So in these times, God promises this is not the end of the story. Even though you will be brought to exile, this is not the end of the story. I'll bring you back. Now I'll make a new covenant with you. And now let's see how this looked like. So we remember the Babylonians deported the people of Israel to Babylon, and then the Persians came and rescued them. And the Persian king Cyrus made a decree to let the people of Israel, so the Jews, not only to return to their land, to Israel, but also he told them, you have to rebuild the temple. And Cyrus even gives them money so that they can do it. So they go back and they rebuilt the temple because the temple was destroyed. I think I didn't mention that before, but oh my gosh, the temple was destroyed. That was a tragedy. When the Babylonians came, they destroyed the temple, the house of God, the place where God lived. So now they rebuilt the temple. And from now on, we say this is the second temple because the first one was destroyed. This is the second temple. And so the second temple was rebuilt. And then we see a series of other rulers reigning in the land of Israel. So the people of Israel were never free from that time on. Although they were kind of freed from the Babylonians, it didn't take long until the Greek Empire ruled over them. So Alexander the Great, you might have heard of him, came, and again the temple was not destroyed but desecrated. So as you might have heard, pigs are very impure in Judaism. And what can you do in order to desecrate a temple? You take pigs and you offer them, you slay them on the altar of the Jewish temple. Not only that, they also put Greek gods and idols inside the temple of Jerusalem and worshipped these gods there. And this is how the temple was desecrated, not destroyed physically, but desecrated. So after that, the temple had to become pure again. And that is the story of the Maccabees who fought against the Greek Empire, and they won, and they dedicated the temple again to God, and they made it sacred again. And this is the story of Hanukkah, when God made a great miracle and let the oil for the lamps burn for 8 days, although the oil actually lasted only for 1 day, but God made this miracle that it lasted for 8 days until they could produce new oil. So that was the big miracle of Hanukkah. That was during that time. And so this is important. The Greeks desecrated the temple. The Maccabees, which is a Jewish group, they won it back through fighting and dedicated the temple again. They rededicated the temple to God. And after the Greeks, so the Greeks were there, they had quite a big influence in culture, in language, and everything. And then the Romans came. The Romans also had a big influence in culture and language, but actually the Romans stole everything from the Greek. So also, although you might have heard that the Roman Empire, wow, the Roman Empire was big, was all over the Mediterranean, and covered basically everything of the known world back then. But the language there was not only Latin, it was actually Greek. This is how the Jews learned Greek and how Greek became their main language. They even translated the Tanakh, the so-called Old Testament, the law, the prophets, and the scriptures, into Greek, the so-called Septuagint, which is the Greek translation of the Old Testament. So the Tanakh was written in Hebrew, and the Jews translated it into Greek because in these time, most of the Jews spoke Greek, and that was the language everyone would understand. And then we have other areas of Jewish centers. So we have Alexandria and still Babylon, and so other places become really important for Judaism. But what I want to point out here on this slide is that after the Greek Empire, the Roman Empire came, and Israel never really lived freely in their own land. So the Israelites, the Jews, lived in their land, at least this, but there was only very short times in between when they lived there freely. Usually there were other rulers ruling over them. During the Roman Empire, there was also a time when Jesus was born and lived in Israel and taught his disciples, and then he was crucified. And on the line of big world history, the next really important date you have to remember, and this is the last date for today you have to remember, is 70 AD, which is the year of the destruction of the Second Temple. So there were some more Jewish revolts against the Romans. Actually, back then, the big expectation was that when the Messiah comes, and everyone knew the Messiah will come soon, when the Messiah comes, Mashiach, he will be the savior that the people of Israel waited for. When the Messiah comes, he will free us from the Romans. So they all thought that Jesus had to do something, and then Jesus did something in another way, not physically saving them from the Jews, saving the Jews from the Romans, but spiritually saving people from sin. So the expectations for a Messiah who would fight physically against the Romans was still there, and Jewish revolts broke up over and over again until the Romans came, conquered Jerusalem. They already ruled over Jerusalem, but they let everything be there. That was a good strategy of the Romans. They didn't have to destroy everything and then later rebuild. They conquered areas through battles, through fightings, but they didn't have to destroy every city. Only when there was too much of a revolt. And because the Jews did many revolts against the Romans, at some point they conquered Jerusalem, burnt down the city, destroyed the temple, and when the second temple was completely destroyed, that was 70 AD, then the Jews really surrendered. Like they didn't have to do, they couldn't do anything anymore because the second temple was destroyed and is destroyed until today. And then a very interesting fact, that was also the time of when the Romans renamed Israel. So the area where the Jews lived in was, when they lived there, it was called Judah or Israel. Then Romans came, they called it Judea, Samaria. Like there was already names that the Romans used of these people who lived there and of the places there. But now, as the Romans not only wanted to destroy the Jewish presence in these areas, but also they wanted to destroy the remembrance of Jewish life there. So they came and renamed the land of Israel Palestine. And you might think, oh, because of the Palestinians. But that's wrong, because back then there were no Palestinians there. There were only Jews. And the Romans renamed this area Palestine because, this is really funny, because of the Philistines. Who are the Philistines? I didn't really mention them, but during the time of David, during the time of the judges, during the time of David, there was a people from Greece who came by ships to the coasts of Egypt and Israel and all these areas, and also Lebanon, and they were called Philistines, and they had fightings against Israel all the time. They were really strong enemies of Israel, but as all the enemies of Israel, as all kingdoms back then, they rose and fell. They rose and fell. And the Philistines never really had a big empire. They were just a small people who had some uh, local problems with the Israelites living there, but they were like the biggest enemy of Israel. Like in the stories of what the Jewish people would tell their kids, of the greatest enemies they had, that was like the Philistines, but only because they were because they had stories of King David fighting against the Philistines. But during the time of the Romans, the Philistines didn't exist anymore. No one remembered the Philistines. They were just as every other people. They rose and fell, and they were spread under all the other peoples, under all their neighbor countries, and they were not important anymore. And the Romans heard from the Israelites, from the Jews, that they had a big enemy called the Philistines. This enemy doesn't exist anymore. And only because they wanted to punish the Jews, that's why the Romans renamed the land of Israel Palestine according to the Philistines. You know, Philistine, F and P is the same in Latin because Latin doesn't have an F. You cannot write a name with F. Like Philip, the name Philip, you have to say Philip, because there's no difference between F and P. So the Philistines are called the Philistines in Latin, and then you say the Palestine, look. So Israel is named Palestine only to mock the Jews. So the Romans call this area Palestine, and that was after the Bar Kokhba revolt in 135 AD. That was the last revolt when any Jews came and fought against the Romans, and that was the end of Jewish revolts in this area. So you see how the Romans invented that name Palestine without any people, without any reference, only these Philistines who didn't exist back then. But the Jews who lived there, who have lived there before, who were living in there during the time of the Romans, and who continued living there, they were not allowed to carry their own name, Land of Israel, anymore. So that was the invention of the Romans. And how things developed from back then until today, this is what we're going to learn next week, because this is the end of our teaching today. And so we've learned from Abraham to Jesus how the people of Israel were formed as a people, how they came into the land, how the names Israel, Jews, and so on came from. And we will learn next week how Judaism and how Christianity were formed in mainly the West, but also in other areas in the world, and why this is important. And we will learn especially of what happened in the land of Israel after the destruction of the Second Temple. So I thank you, everyone who listened to that teaching today, who joined us. Thank you for your interest. Thank you for everyone who was here, also who joined online. And now I want to give you a time for questions. So whatever you want to ask about this lecture, anything on that topic, you can ask it now. And there are 3 options, as I mentioned. Everyone who's here can ask a question. I'll give you the microphone. Everyone who's in the meeting that is recorded, you can whether raise your voice and ask the question, then you will be also heard in the recording on YouTube, or you can write your question in the chat and I'll read it out and then answer the question. So thank you so much for your attention. Thank you for joining us tonight. I hope you enjoyed the lectures. Okay, thank you for all your clapping hands and everything I can see here in the meeting. And I will give you a few more minutes to ask questions or to write it in the chat if you want to. I'll continue now with the opportunity for you to support what we're doing. The lectures are for free and they will stay for free. I'm not asking for any money. I just know that many people always ask me afterwards, oh, Talita, I really want to donate something, where can I give money to? Only if you want to. I will show you two options now. First of all, you can donate to the Jesus House Church Fulda, JHG Fulda, which is the church that we're in right now. This is the place where I'm holding these lectures. You can donate to Jesus Hausgemeinde, Keilat Bet Yeshua, Jesus House Church Fulda. This way you can donate. Or you can also donate to Christians for Israel International. It's an organization that provides with lots of information and lots of support for Israel. So if you want to donate to money that actually goes right to Israel, then you can donate to Christians for Israel. Both options are shown here. But as I said, these lectures will stay for free, and this is just an opportunity for you if you want to donate. Okay, there's one question in the meet. Paul, are you okay with showing your video and letting us hear your voice in the recording?
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay, then go for it.
Yeah. Well, thanks a lot for the nice presentation. It was really interesting. But also I'm kind of tired by now. But I have two questions and I want to ask them, but afterwards I'm gonna leave. Just wanted to let you know. I actually couldn't find the button to use the chat, so that's why I chose to speak up personally. Okay, so one question was about the Romans. You said that they spoke Greek, or they brought the Greek language to the land of Israel, or and that kind of confused me. Because I don't really know in how far Latin was the everyday language that people use in everyday life. So I guess you get my point. So maybe you can clarify that. And also, okay, I'll let you answer first, and then I'll give the second question.
Okay, thank you. That's a very good question because it might be confusing if you don't understand what I mean. First of all, so the Greeks came also into the land of Israel, and of course they were the first ones who brought the language, the Greek language, to Israel and also their culture. But what I said in general, the Romans took most of what became Roman Latin culture. They took it from the Greeks. So even the idea of their gods, the invention of having different gods and how they're called and what they do, they're basically the Greek gods. So you have Greek gods
Yeah.
and they have Greek names, and then you have the same gods in the Latin Roman world, and they just get Latin names, but the same story, same mythology. So they take from the Greeks. And they also took a lot of wisdom from the Greeks, like lots of science, I would say, lots of philosophy, many ideas of. We all know that the Greeks are known for inventing democracy, kind of, and everything that the Romans have, like I would say most of what the Romans have, what we call Latin Roman culture nowadays, is taken from the Greeks. The Greeks were the Greek Empire was never as big as the Roman Empire became, but they were a lot more developed in knowledge and in science and also in culture. And the Romans basically took that and they gave it a Roman look, but in fact it was Greek. That's what I said. And now to your question, who brought the Greek language to the land of Israel, to the Jews? First of all, we know that the Greek language was widespread not only in Greece, but all over, later became the Roman Empire and beyond. Even the Germans, so the Germanic tribes, we found them writing things in Greek letters. And even in Eastern Europe, some tribes used Greek letters to write the stories of their mythology, although that was never part of the Roman Empire. So we see that the Greek language was widespread, and also it was a common language that many people spoke back then. So it was more of a day-to-day language. Latin also became a very important language, especially when it comes to formal things. So any decree or anything that was spread throughout the Roman Empire was in Latin, but many people, especially if they were well educated, they spoke Greek, and people who were not well educated spoke Greek on the streets. So lots of trade happened in Greek, and the Romans used that. They never really wanted to invent anything new. They just wanted to use what they had and make the best out of it. So they didn't force everyone to learn Latin, but they used the Greek that everyone already spoke, and used it to communicate with people. But official, formal decrees or any scriptures that were given out, they were usually in Latin. So that we see many inscriptions are also in Latin. But even at the temple of Jerusalem, when the second temple still stood, we see inscriptions in Greek that say every non-Jew is not allowed to go beyond that point, because then there was, the temple had a more sacred area for the Jewish men, and then for the Jewish women, and then another sacred area for Jewish men, and then for the Jewish priests, and then for the high priest. So there were places that only specific people were allowed to enter. And then there was a place all around that area on top of the Temple Mount, and that was a place that was allowed for everyone to enter. Even the Romans came in, and all other non-Jewish people. And this inscription says in Greek, you are not allowed to enter beyond that point if you're not Jewish. So that was Greek, and from that and from other evidence, we see that Greek was a language that was very common, widespread, many people spoke it, so many people that the Jews even translated the holy books from Hebrew or Aramaic to Greek, because that was the language in which people communicated back then. I hope that answered your question.
Yeah, it does. Thank you. Okay, and the second question is about the Philistines. So were they like a Greek people coming from what is nowadays Greece? So they have no they had no Arab or Middle East roots, actually.
Yeah, that's a very good question. Thank you for that question. So the Philistines are a group of people that originally came from the area that is now Greece, maybe also parts of Turkey, I don't know, or Macedonia or other places in this area, but definitely from the West. So the Philistines were not Arab people. They had not, like, from the Arabic insula, or from this Arabic area, like more the eastern area. They were not from the east, they came from the west. We know this because they came by ship. They were a people of seamen. They came from the area of Greece by ship to the coasts of northern Africa, which is like Egypt, and then also to the coasts of Israel, all the way up to what is now Lebanon, like this area. This is where they settled, and many of them. But okay, let's focus on the main part. Most of them settled on the area that is nowadays called the Gaza Strip. So the Philistines settled in this area. And we know that they came from the west and not from the east because they stayed in this area. They never went to the mountains further east. And they also brought their ceramics, which means their tools that for everyday life that they use. They brought it from Greece. So the knowledge about how to produce these tools, how to use their weapons, and especially how what kind of culture they brought with them. So what I'm saying is the style of how of art was very Greece related. So when you find a piece of pottery, for example, you're an archaeologist, you dig, you find a piece of pottery, and you wonder from which time period is it, from which people, who was there, what does it tell us? Then you look at the pattern of that pottery, you look at the style, at what kind of decoration does the vase or whatever you find is used. So what kind of style is it that tells you from which people it comes? And the Philistines have a very specific style that is different from the Canaan style that is found there. And it's very similar to the Greece style. So you can say that it comes from Greece, but it's not exactly the Greek style. It comes from Greece. It has influence from this area, but it is brought to the coasts of the land of Israel during the time when still the Canaanites lived there. But it's different from the style of the Canaanites, and it's very different from the Arab style of how pottery or things like that were made, because they used different shapes of their vessels, and they had different decorations. And this is why we know very exactly that the Philistines came from the Greek area from Greece, and they brought their knowledge, their pottery, and everything from there. And it's definitely not an Arab tribe. It's not a Canaanite tribe. It's, you could say, a descendant of some Greece people. And there's actually, by the way, there's really good museums in Israel. I think it's in Ashdod or Ashkelon. I'm not sure anymore. I can't remember. But there's a really good museum about the Philistines. So whenever you go to Israel, you should make sure that you visit that museum, because it explains the story of the Philistines very well, and it shows very good pottery that shows very precisely of where they come from and which style they use, and very good museum. So if you want to learn more about them. But yeah, I hope that answers your question about the Philistines.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you very much. And yeah, goodbye for now. I hope you get well. And yeah, thanks again for the
Yeah,
talk.
thank you so much. Thank you so much, Laila Tov. Yeah, thank you so much. Okay, thank you so much, everyone who joined us tonight in tonight's lecture. If you have any more questions, you can always ask me. And for example, write me an email or ask me next time. We will meet here again in the English version next Tuesday, so in 1 week, for the second part of our series on, for our lectures on Israel. And next time we will talk about the development of Judaism and Christianity. So we will basically continue from where we finished today. Thank you so much for your attention, and I hope we will see you again next week. Good night.